Welcome back to the Healthy Gut podcast. Today I'm joined by my very own osteopath, Dr. Meg Withers. Meg is the co-founder of the Osteopathic Pelvic Hub, and she has really helped not only myself, but my gorgeous little girl, Ruby, with our osteopathic needs. Welcome to the show, Meg.
Thank you so much for having me.
Meg and I have had many conversations as she's been treating both myself and Ruby about the importance of pelvic health and what happens when our muscles get really tight in that region. And it's something that I see a lot with my own clients, that there's often a lot of body stiffness and muscle tightness and fascia tightness, and that can be a contributing factor to their body being stuck and particularly holding on when they have a constipation type picture with their SIBO. Meg, I'd love to delve into what is happening in our body and our muscles and the fascia and all of that tension in our body that can really contribute or even lead to constipation. Why is that happening?
Yeah, so it's a big thing that we see all the time, and whether someone's coming in for constipation or they've got SIBO, that might be their primary complaint and that's what they're coming in for. But for other people, they might be coming to see us for endometriosis, or they've got, it's difficulty passing a stool. They might have pain with sex, and that can be an indicator that might be some pelvic floor tension. So through a history, we'll dig a little bit deeper, and I will say to people, it sounds like you're constipated. And so I think the first thing is actually I explain to people what is constipation. And for some people, they have a bowel motion every day, but they say, no, I'm not constipated. But I say to them, do you feel satisfied? Is it easy to go? Do you have to push or do you have to strain? Because if it's not easy and they're feeling like they have to sit there for ages, they can't relax their pelvic floor, that is constipation. And so then when we're looking at the pelvic floor, we've got one muscle in particular. It's called the puborectalis muscle. So it starts from the pubic bone, comes all the way to the back to the coccyx, and then back to the pubic bone. So it really wraps around. And that's what it essentially creates, a kink in the hose. And the hose is that lower part of the rectum where our poo sits. And so when that muscle is constricted, it stops us from doing a poo at an inappropriate time. However, when we're on the toilet, we have to be able to relax that muscle so that we can straighten out that back passage. We can have a really easy evacuation and bowel motion. So that's the first thing, is teaching people how it all works. And a big thing with that is, are they in a good posture? So do they have their knees above their hips? So I don't know how familiar you are with this one, but squatty potty. Everyone, I don't care whether people think they're constipated or not, but everyone has to have a squatty potty. So bringing our knees closer to our chest, our feet flat on the floor, or on the stool, and connecting with our breath allows those pelvic floor muscles to actually relax. That puborectalis muscle can relax, and essentially the poo can come through. So that's always the first one, is getting people to be aware of what they're doing on the toilet, making sure that they're not pushing or straining. The breath is huge. So when we've got to look at the whole abdominal cavity. So the diaphragm's at the top, and then we've got our pelvic floor at the bottom, and it really acts as like this pump. So every time we take a deep breath in, it kind of gives that little bit of a push on our intestines and our gut, and then the pelvic floor needs to work with that. So every time we inhale, take that deep breath in, the diaphragm comes down and our pelvic floor lengthens. And then on the exhale, that's when people might think of, a Kegel or an activation. So we know that 50% of people that are constipated have dyssynergy in their pelvic floor. And what that means is they have the inability to relax their pelvic floor, or what they actually do is when they think or they're trying to relax, they actually activate their pelvic floor, which is the complete opposite of what needs to happen to relax that puborectalis muscle and allow that hose or that back passage to straighten out for the poo to come through.
I think breath work is such a undiscussed or just missed opportunity with so many people. And the first time I had anyone say to me, how are you breathing when you're trying to do a poo was Alyssa Tate, who I've had on the show. And for my listeners, they probably remember her, where we had a whole episode on visceral manipulation. And she said to me, I bet, Rebecca, when you're pushing out that poo, you are straining, you're pushing down, you're kind of clamping down with your muscles. And she said, and you're doing the exact opposite of what you actually need to do. You need to be relaxing and changing your breath work rather than straining. And when you've always had to strain because you've always had constipation, like I had always had, that just feels like that's your normal way of going to the poo. You don't actually realize that that's counterintuitive and you're probably making things worse.
It's interesting too, because we get a lot of children that come in for pediatric, there goes an AirPod, for pediatric bladder and bowel dysfunction. And, I was working with a girl yesterday and she's 10, and we were trying to discuss constipation and whether she was constipated. And Mum said, I don't know, because I don't go into the toilet with her anymore. So it's really hard, because once you're toilet trained, no one's necessarily coaching you on how to go to the toilet.
Exactly. That's my challenge as well. I had no one there with me. I don't think anyone, when I was growing up, was conscious of the fact that I went to the toilet once or twice a week. And I wasn't sharing it with anyone. I also didn't know that that was abnormal, that I should have been going daily. It was never a discussion. It was never a discussion that I'd often have to sit for a long period of time on the toilet as a child. I just had to really push and strain and jiggle about to try and get something out. Now I know that's constipation. If we talk about some simple breath work ideas, so for the person that's either watching or listening to this episode, they're thinking, oh my gosh, I push, I strain down, I bear down. Obviously, we've talked about the squatty potty, and even if you don't have one, you can do something like I did before I got anything. I took a laundry bucket and I turned it upside down and I put my feet on that. You could get books.
Awesome.
What else could you do, Meg?
So you can, whatever you've got, a box. I always say too, if you're in a public toilet and you've got nothing, get some toilet rolls and stack some toilet rolls underneath your feet, a desk bin, whatever you can. Some people go, oh yeah, I go up onto my tippy toes. That's not the same, because what happens is if you're activating your calves, you're still going to be activating through the pelvic floor. So the feet need to be flat and elevated. So honestly, whatever you've got, a stool, anything that you can find around the house to elevate your feet.
And it's actually not expensive to get a squatty potty or one of the variations of that theme, to put something underneath your feet and to have it at your toilet. You can get really inexpensive steps that children use when they're climbing up onto the toilet. That works really well as well for an adult. It just needs to be something simple that elevates the feet. Is there a guideline as to how high our feet should be off the ground?
I'm actually not 100% sure, but I always just say make sure your knees are above your hips. Because you can see, and you can see some people too, like, they get into a really deep squat, and it's whatever position, whether it's, the knees just above the hips or further to the chest. I say for some people too, if you really feel like your poo is stuck and you need it, like some people need to use, like the breath's super important, but some people need to actually kind of move their body back and forth, which is just sort of trying to wriggle that poo out. Going back to the breath, a lot of it too, and it comes up in their history, like whether they're, whether they're a really stressed person, which I think just in modern living, we're all just running around. We're so busy. We've got so much on. We've got so much tension in our whole body. And I just say, get on the toilet, do a body scan. Start at your head. What's your face doing? What's your jaw doing? And we know there's a big connection between the jaw and the pelvic floor. So if we're clenching the jaw and activating the muscles through here, we're going to activate through the pelvic floor. We also know that through our voice box, we can create different sounds that help relax the pelvic floor. So a deep guttural sound like a or a m, that really helps relax the pelvic floor. High pitched sounds in that clenching that will activate the pelvic floor. And that's why I always say to women who are coming in for any birth prep, I'm like, the way that we do a poo and the way that we birth a baby is the same. And that's why if you ever are on a maternity ward, I'm sure you know with Ruby is lots of birth classes will talk about connecting with your breath and doing these low tone guttural sounds. And so women have that primal or that animalistic moo that comes out because it's so deep and guttural, and that helps to relax the pelvic floor. So on the toilet, again, you're in a good ergonomic position, feet are slightly elevated, and just start with some deep breaths, relax that jaw. And they can even do like a, and we call it like an oocha. There goes another AirPod. Oocha. So the oo is that deep guttural sound. So it's like a ooh. And then the cha is this little push from the diaphragm that can help just encourage that poo along. So yeah, that would be my breathing tip for the toilet.
Such a practical and handy tip. And if you're just listening to the audio, head over to the YouTube page so that you can actually watch Meg as she's demonstrating those breathing exercises. Because I think sometimes I really learn from the visual side of things as well as the auditory. Are there any other tips that you've got for us, Meg, for the person that is constipated? And it's such a common picture with SIBO, and it becomes a major stressor as well. People really get worried about, I haven't done a poo today. Will I do a poo today? Was that enough of a poo today? I feel like I was incomplete with that poo. Is there more to come? I recently had a client call where she was saying she'd had a day where she just had lots of little pieces, and that was really frustrating to her because she wanted to have one good complete evacuation, and she felt like she spent all day doing little bits.
Yeah, look, I think it's tackling what's going on with the pelvis and the pelvic floor. So making sure that there's reduced tension. And a lot of the stuff that we do here at the Hub is we do internal assessments of the pelvic floor. We can do external for those that aren't wanting internal, but to actually gauge and go, what's actually going on? And if I say, take a deep breath and relax, or lengthen the pelvic floor, can they do that, or are they activating? So making sure, that's being addressed. Of course, there's the gut, there's diet. That's a huge component as well. But I always say to people, you could be having the best diet in the world and you can go on your antimicrobials and all this, but if you still can't relax that puborectalis muscle to do a poo, like you're going to really struggle still. And then, of course, lifestyle and stress management. What are people actively doing to calm down their nervous system? Because as you were saying, with the stress and then the stressing around doing a poo, we become hyper vigilant on, have I gone? Was it enough? Have I eliminated? And I get people coming in and they're like, my whole day's planned around when I go to the toilet. So it really has a big impact on their social life and their work life. So yeah, body scans, breathing, meditation, acupuncture is awesome as well. Another thing that people can look for is a visceral osteopath or someone that does visceral work to help reduce a lot of that tension through their entire digestive systems, like getting hands-on to that ascending and descending colon, that ileocecal valve, which are really common spots for like SIBO and poo to get a bit stuck. That can be super effective. Lymphatic massages are really good as well.
I know I've shared on the podcast and in my coaching sessions and my group coaching, I've shared a lot around how bodywork can be quite incredible for allowing the body to release a poo. When I first discovered this whole concept of visceral manipulation and body work for digestive health, I didn't know Meg existed. I hadn't found her yet. So I used to fly from Melbourne to Queensland. That's 2 states away and a 2-hour flight to go and see Alyssa Tate, who's gorgeous. Very happy to do that trip. And she would work on me intensively. So I'd go for a 2-day intensive bodywork session. And I'd come back to Melbourne. I'd feel a bit knocked about because we'd done a lot of intensive work in a short period of time. But I would then be able to go to the toilet with such freedom for ages, like for weeks. I would be able to go to the toilet. And it just showed me how important relaxing those tight muscles, the fascia, the pelvis, etc., the pelvic floor, was on actually allowing my gut to do its job and to work properly. I wasn't upping magnesium or taking laxatives. It was literally a wonderful byproduct of that body work. And so I'm a huge advocate now for people like Meg and Alyssa and all the other practitioners out there who work on the actual body, because we often get fixated on SIBO, taking a killing phase of herbs or antibiotics, and we're not thinking about the broader body. Why is the body stuck? Why is it tight? Because that's often a major contributing factor to why the gut isn't working correctly. Meg, can you talk a little bit about, I'd just love to touch on the jaw and the pelvis and the pelvic floor, because I know many of my clients clench and grind their teeth and they're clenching overnight. I do it as well. My best friend does it. We're constantly talking about, the jaw. And I have had conversations with my dentist about, he sees this commonly in women, particularly, not so much men. Men don't seem to clench and grind like women do. What's happening with our jaws? Why is it so connected with our pelvic floor? How can something so high up in the body be connected to something so low down?
It's actually so interesting when you look at the anatomy of like what's going on through here and then the pelvic floor, and they're really similar, but we just get this co-activation of this clench, which usually it comes from stress, and sometimes we don't even realize we're doing it until we get to the end of the day and we're like, oh my gosh, I've been holding that tension all day. So yeah, it's just this co-activation. We clench through here and we get an activation through the pelvic floor.
And when you think about it, this is the mouth is the start of our digestive system. The anus is the end, and you've got all of these mouth muscles at the top. You've got that pelvic floor muscle at the base. It kind of makes sense that it's a bit of a mirror. And I can see that I can feel in my body, if I'm really stressed, I'm clenching my jaw often during the day without even realizing it. Well, my pelvic tension then would be incredibly tight as well. And I bet if I had a day like that, I would really struggle to do a poo. It would be a challenge. I'd have to really work at it, really relax and be very conscious about trying to get that breath work going and relax the body.
Totally. And I think I always say to people too, like constipation is just a symptom. And it's really a matter of getting to the root cause of that for that person. So we know too with constipation, there's so many other comorbidities that they overlap. So that one person could be constipated and have low back pain. Someone else could have endometriosis. Someone could have the SIBO picture. For other people, it's more of that stress. So it's really trying to get to the bottom of why are they now constipated, or why do they have SIBO? And I remember when I was doing this visceral course once, they showed us this video, and it was a surgeon who I think they were operating on a woman that had endometriosis, and it was keyhole, and they showed this pocket that was red raw in their small intestine. And they said, this is most likely, this woman probably has SIBO. Like you could see how red raw it was, and it was due to an adhesion. And he said, if we can clear up this adhesion, that might actually clear. And it made me kind of go, it is so that structure and that function, which is one of the principles of osteopathy, they are so interrelated. If we can get the nervous system down, if we can get the muscle tension down in that, and able to connect, like actually just connect to the pelvic floor muscles and go, what is my pelvic floor actually doing? And can people get that understanding and that feeling of, oh yeah, I am relaxing or I am activating? It's huge. So we've got to calm our bodies down. It's definitely probably the first thing we've got to start with.
For the person who's listening, how do we feel our pelvic floor? Do you have some simple techniques on what we could do as we're all listening to you talk to know whether our pelvic floor is really activated and tight or whether it's nice and relaxed?
Look, it's a really hard one because everyone responds really differently to cues. But the first thing I would do is, again, get into that squatty potty position, because that position actually allows the pelvic floor to lengthen a little bit. Take some deep breaths and think about, and you might even use your hands just from some sensory input and biofeedback to the brain, and put your hands in between your legs, and go, can I feel something when I breathe in here? The other thing you could do is think about stopping yourself from doing a wee or a poo. And in doing that, we're going to activate those muscles. If you can feel that, then think about letting that go as if you were to let go and do a wee or a poo. So that's probably the first thing, is just like think about that area, connect with your breath. Some people, it's visualization. I'll say, I want you to stare at this picture of your pelvic floor and see if you can get it to relax in your mind.
One of the things you showed me really early on of coming to see you for treatment was you've got models in your rooms. And I remember seeing an actual model of what the pelvic floor looks like. And that really helped me to visualize it in my own body. And if you, as the listener, haven't ever seen what the pelvic floor looks like, go onto Google, go onto YouTube. You can find everything these days online. Find a video on what the pelvic floor looks like, because that might be, like me, really helpful for you to visualize it, therefore connect with it within your own body, as well as trying to then do some exercises to feel it. I know after having Ruby, and sadly I had to have that emergency cesarean, which was the last thing I wanted. One of the things that I felt was happening in my body post-surgery was a constant feeling of my muscles being on. And I really struggled to switch them off. And even as I sit here now, I'm like consciously trying to relax my pelvic floor. Meg, what do you see when women have had surgery, things like keyhole surgery for endometriosis or C-sections, be it planned or emergency, or any other type of abdominal work? Can that lead to, like my case, where you're ending up with this constant tightness, constant activation, constant guarding and holding that makes it even harder for women to relax those muscles?
100%. Anyone who's had any abdominal surgery, we know that the scar tissue, it grows back that little bit thicker and tighter. So things around it, and I always use my top as an example. If I'm going to gather some of this t-shirt, like it's starting to pull up from my belly button now through my t-shirt, and that's what all that fascia and connective tissue does. So we get that physical scar tissue, we can get adhesions and that tightness. But I think a big thing too, especially after like an emergency C-section, like the stress on the body in a situation like that is huge. And so for some women, that can be quite a traumatic thing. And I always say, how do you feel after everything that happened? And so it's almost on an emotional level connecting back with that scar tissue. Anything that's traumatic, and that can be emotional, and it can be that the physical scar and the pain that you experience, the body's reaction to pain is we just want to sort of tighten up. Like if we think of period pain, we just want to curl into a ball. And it's the same thing with a cesarean scar tissue. Is quite often is we see women, like it's really hard to stand up straight after the cesarean birth. And so, you're going to have an incredible amount of tension. Even women who have had a vaginal birth and they've had an episiotomy or they've had scar tissue, the response is going to be to tighten up. And whether it's directly in the pelvic floor or whether it's just the whole pelvis and the whole body, because we're so uncomfortable, we're constantly bracing, we're sucking our tummies in. It's our whole, if we go back to this cavity in the abdomen, our whole pressure system's off. We're not breathing properly. Therefore, we're in this sympathetic state of fight and flight, and we can't get these areas to relax. And that's where the hands-on treatment, like onto the scar tissue, we do something called skin rolling. It's really, I think I've done that on you before, just to get all the layers of the tissue through the abdomen to free up so that they've got really good drainage and really good blood flow. Another thing too is women who have had a vaginal birth, it can be if they're feeling really constipated afterwards, something that they need to get checked is to make sure they don't have a prolapse like in the bowel. Because I saw a lady yesterday, she was 70, and I said, oh, I've been constipated my whole life, and she had a rectocele, which was where the bowel sort of falls into the vaginal wall, and she just thought it was her diet. And I said it could be a diet, but it also is the whole process of having some very large babies. Yeah. So, yeah, lots of big factors there, from whether it's a vaginal birth, a cesarean birth, scar tissue, even from an, appendix removal, gallbladder removal. It's all going to contribute to this tension throughout the whole gastrointestinal system.
And I guess the question some of my listeners will have is it ever too late to start? Let's say we use the example of who's 70. I've got many of my coaching clients who are in their 60s and 70s, and they might be thinking, well, is it too late to do something? I've been dealing with this, perhaps their child is 40, and they might think, can any progress be made on a 40-year-old scar or injury that I incurred during childbirth?
I understand, but absolutely. Like, I'm a big believer in everything can always be better. And just because, someone feels like they've gotten to a point in their life, they're a bit older, it doesn't mean that they have to continue to put up with this stuff. There's so much that can be done. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can just be they can have an awareness around what their body is actually doing. And even just starting with breathing mechanics and a good toilet posture, some people that can change their life. They're like, oh my God, I'm doing these amazing poos. I feel great. I feel cleansed out. Yeah, it's never too late.
That's great to hear. Endometriosis and SIBO have a high correlation, and many of my female clients have endo. What are you seeing in your practice with your endo ladies? It can be such a debilitating condition. I have it myself. I started having extremely heavy and very painful periods when I turned 11. And I wish I'd known what I know now about it. I would have, and my mum wishes she knew as well, because we would have been a lot more proactive. But if we just talk about the physicality of a condition like endometriosis, what are you seeing in the bodies of your endo ladies? And for the listener, what can we do to help improve how our body feels with that kind of condition?
Yeah, the first thing is anyone with endo needs a good team around them. The things that we do definitely is we do a lot of that internal myofascial release to the pelvic floor muscles, because, again, the pain response to their painful periods is to hold so much tension in their pelvic floor, and a lot of that can give them that generalized pelvic pain, lots of aches that can be so physically debilitating. They can't stand up, they can't go to work, and that can be pelvic floor, it can be their glute muscles, it can be their tummy muscles that they're just holding on so tightly. And I always think, so when we have a period, it's that uterine lining is shedding, and because we've got so much tightness, it is really hard for good flow through that area. So reducing any tension, and I always talk about creating space within the pelvis, can really help with that flow, so it doesn't feel as stagnant and it's not so hard for the muscles. There's a lot of fascial release and visceral release techniques that we can do in and around the uterus, the cervix, the ovaries, and the connection that the uterus might have to the sigmoid colon, and making sure that, in that pouch of Douglas, it's so common for people to get endo spots through there, and so that can present as constipation, where it's if we can get those organs really gliding smoothly between each other, it can seriously help with doing a poo. And again, that assessing their abdomen and making sure that they're breathing properly. Looking at all the fascia from the pelvic floor that comes all the way up into the abdominal cavity, giving pelvic floor exercises to lengthen, connecting with their breath. So it's a lot of yoga stuff, happy baby, child's pose, anything that allows that pelvic floor to lengthen can be so helpful. Yeah. And then definitely working with a nutritionist, someone that can help with their gut stuff, decreasing inflammation, anything that's going to reduce that inflammatory process that's going on in their entire body.
When I think about my own experience with endo, so at 11, I started having periods, and pretty much right from the get go, they were pretty full on. And I would have a
Mm,
15-minute window from the moment my period started, regardless of what time of day or night that was, to get pain medication in. And if I didn't get it in within 15 minutes, I was then bedridden for a couple of days and writhing in agony. So I think back to my younger self and I can just imagine how clenched I was because I was in absolute agony. It felt like I was being stabbed.
mm,
And then when it was finally
debilitating.
diagnosed in my 20s, I then went on the conveyor belt of surgeries. So no one until a female endo specialist that I worked with in London suggested that I look at my diet and we start reducing inflammation, and I came off gluten and dairy, and whoa, amazing. What a huge transformation I had. But prior to that, I'd had male doctors and they just booked me in for surgeries. That was their solution. So
Mm,
I had years and years and years, decades of a lot of pain. I remember when I had my very first visceral manipulation session, not only could I go to the toilet freely, the next
mm.
period I had, there was zero pain, nothing. I, I was just astounded. And admittedly, my periods had got a lot easier as I had got older. They weren't, you know, so debilitating like they were when I was in my teens. But I still needed to take painkillers. Would always have to have some pain meds on board for the first 1 to 2 days of my period, and then it would ease off. And I remember thinking, I actually didn't know this period was coming. I got no symptoms, and then I had no pain, and it was transformative. And again, it comes
Wow.
back to how amazing bodywork can be for a condition we might not think we need bodywork for.
100%. And I talk about too, like, I don't know if you've ever had where you clench your jaw so much you get a headache, and it's that referral pain. So if we apply that to the amount of tension that could be in the pelvic floor and the pelvis, and you then get this generalized ache. So many women with endo, they're like, I get these aching thighs, my sacrum and my coccyx like is just throbbing. And it's all of this is just referred pain from what's going on and this tension on the inside. And it becomes that cascade of it's painful, so I'm going to tense up. That creates more pain, so we tense up more. And that's just what continues on for women for decades. Like, it's nuts. But yeah, especially what we find is that internal myofascial release technique or techniques to the pelvic floor, it can be really profound. And also looking at the coccyx, like so many people have, whether they've landed on their coccyx or they can have tension in the pelvic floor, which pulls on the coccyx, and then the coccyx gets stiff, so it creates more tightening in the pelvic floor. And again, it's addressing all the structural things which ultimately helps the function.
Let's talk about the actual act of the body work. And I know one of the
Mm,
surprising side effects for me was that I actually had some pretty big emotional releases as some of the areas of my body were worked on. I had no idea I was storing emotions in my physical body like that. I had just assumed it was all in my brain. What's the process that you go through for working with someone? Perhaps someone has been in a lot of pain. Their body is very tight. They're quite guarded. Perhaps they have had a history of trauma, or there's been a lot of stress going on. And the thought to them of having someone touch their body might feel a little bit overwhelming. How do you
mm.
help those people get to a point where you can do the physical work that you know will ultimately make them feel so much better?
Yeah, you're right. Everyone's really different, and we 100% will work with people at their own pace. And you can get, we spend a lot of time in that initial consult taking a really thorough history. And I've had times where I've said, we're just taking history today. We're not going to do, I might, have a quick assessment of their body, but we might not even get to hands-on treatment because they're just not ready for it. So for some people, they want to dive in and go, yep, let's figure it all out and get hands on. And for other people, it is super slow. Treatment is really gentle, and we can do things. We've got techniques that are really gentle and light that can really calm down their nervous system, and help that parasympathetic nervous system come into play, which really calms down the body. We work really closely here. We've got cranial osteopaths that are super gentle, and can really help balance the body in a completely different way. So if someone is just hyper vigilant, anxiety's up, very fearful, they've had a trauma, and a trauma for one person can be completely different for a trauma for someone else. Um, but at the end of the day, their nervous system is still wired for that, for a specific event or something that's happened to them. And so it always starts off really light. There's a lot of discussion around, a lot of education, because we want people coming in, especially if we are going to be feeling their pelvis, pubic bone or their glutes, or even an internal assessment. People need to feel safe. We never ever want someone to feel like they're either in pain or there's a threat, because it goes back to biologically that fight and flight mechanism, where if something's painful, we tense up. And it's just completely counteracting what we're trying to achieve, which is that calmness and that safety within their body, which gets that relaxation. So yeah, there's lots of, as osteopaths, we're very well equipped with different tools, different techniques. So for some people, it's really gentle. Other people need a little bit more kind of deeper work into their gut or release work through their hips. So it really depends on the person. But there's lots of different ways that we can approach it with osteo, cranial osteo, visceral osteo. And then there's the pelvic health side, which, we can do internal myofascial release techniques to the pelvic floor if that's what someone is interested in. But again, we would never, ever, I would never persuade anyone into having that if they weren't comfortable. That's something that they would choose or opt for.
I think that's such valuable advice. And to anyone that is looking for a practitioner, finding someone that you feel safe with is so important. Dr. Meg Withers is based in Melbourne, Australia, so I'm so fortunate to have her in my home city. But for the person that isn't in Australia, in Melbourne, what's the type of practitioner they should go looking for? What are some search terms they could put into Google to try and find someone with your type of skills that might be able to help them work on their own body?
Yeah, so for the visceral work, looking up, like if you're Googling visceral manipulation, that's usually the term that's quite often used. A lot of osteopaths can go off and do extra training in visceral manipulation. So it may be an osteopath, and maybe another practitioner. And then a pelvic health practitioner. Now there's it's so variable. Not all pelvic health practitioners do internal release work. They might do an internal assessment, but they might not actually release the muscles and the fascia off and be able to balance through those tissues. So if you're in Australia, there's a lot of osteopaths now that have been trained through the Pelvic Health Institute of Australia. So they'll be able to find osteopaths that are trained similar to me. But otherwise, if they are overseas, it would be a matter of, Googling visceral pelvic health, maybe jumping onto some forums and seeing if there's some recommendations of people who have a bit of a blend.
And I know before I found you, Meg, and I happened to just stumble across you because you started practicing underneath my husband's office not long after I had Ruby. And he had been going there, and an email went out and he's like, "Hey, Beck, you should go and check this osteo out. She sounds like she might be good." And it was just such a great alignment of luck that I found you, because you really do have the skills that helps my body. So for the person that is in Melbourne, Australia, who's thinking, "Oh my gosh, I need to go and see Meg," how can they find you?
So they can jump on our website. So we're at the Osteopathic Pelvic Hub. So we're located in Hampton Bayside. I'm also at Eastern Osteopathy. So we're in Hawthorn and Kew, which are quite central. So we get a lot of people coming and traveling to see us. Otherwise, I am on Instagram. So if anyone does have any questions or they want some help or advice in finding somebody, just send me a message and I'm more than happy to help them navigate that, because sometimes it is a matter of finding the right person and having a connection, or it's hard to find the right person. And I know people that are in these situations where they've got chronic health issues, that they've got an endometriosis, navigating the system is really exhausting and time consuming, and financially it's really tricky. Yeah.
It is, and you can spend, and many, many people spend tens of thousands of dollars trying to get well again.
Mm.
And my advice for those of you who are thinking after today's episode, I can really see the value in having body work done, is go and do it. You've got nothing to lose. You might have to look around for a little while to find truly the right practitioner for you, but it has been so instrumental in the way my body feels. And I've sent clients, some of my coaching clients, Meg's way. Um, Other of my coaching clients in other countries have seen other bodywork practitioners, and the resounding feedback that I hear from them is that it makes a difference and it makes them feel better. And if for nothing else, you have half an hour or an hour, however long the session is, with someone working on your body, and generally it's very relaxing, and that's great to just switch that body over into that calmer state that you can just take a breath and relax, because we really need to do that more. And so many of us are living in a really hyper aroused, stressed state every day, every hour, and we need to take some time for ourselves. Dr. Meg Withers, thank you so much for coming to Health Gut Podcast. We've been talking about you coming for a while, so it's so good to have you on the show and sharing your wisdom on all things pelvic health and how we can work on our bodies to help how we do a poo and also our digestive health. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm always up for a poo chat, and no, I'm very passionate about what I do. So yeah, I love talking about this stuff. And if anyone's, if there's one person out there that's taken something away from today, I'm very happy. So yeah, thank you so much.
My pleasure. And all of those links that Meg mentioned before, her link to her website, her Instagram handle, etc., are in the show notes. So check them out. Thanks for coming on the show, Meg.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode with Dr. Meg Withers. I'd love it if you could click like and subscribe to the episode or the YouTube channel where this is also airing. And if this episode has been helpful for you and you think you know someone who might benefit from it, please share it with them. And it would mean the absolute world with me if you could leave a rating and a review on the Healthy Gut podcast. We've had a little bit of a break, so it's really great to let people know the show is back and what the episodes are like. So please, if you could do that for me, I would be so grateful and very appreciative. See you next episode.